Hello everyone. In this video we're going to talk a little bit about variables. I'm not going to go into a big long explanation about what we have here on my desktop other than to tell you there is a text editor on the left side and a PowerShell window on the right. If you're not familiar with what those two things are and you're new to programming, I encourage you to watch the video that I made explaining this workflow so that you'll understand what you're seeing here. But you'll see here that I'm in a directory called variables and on a drive that I've temporarily named YT-Python. And if I list out what's inside of that directory, you'll see that there is an app.py file. And that file is what I have open here on the left. So if you're following along and you're wanting to kind of experiment with variables in Python, you can create something similar here just by creating a directory, navigating to it, and then putting an app.py file inside of it, and then that's where we're going to be typing the instructions for the program that we're going to use to demonstrate this idea of variables. A variable in Python is just, a lot of people think of variables as containers, and that's a good way to think about them because they hold, and they don't literally hold information, but it's a good way to think about it. So you assign data to a label, and the label is what's known as the variable. And it's called a variable because it can change. It can have various types of information in it. In some languages, you can only store one type of information in it, but Python, you can change the kind of information that you put in a variable. And so just a practical demonstration of what a variable is, you just create a label that you're going to use for the variable. Let's create a variable called name, and then you can type an equal sign. And then if you type some text and put it between quotation marks, I'll just use my name here, and I'll store my name in that variable, or I will assign that value to the variable, depending on how you want to think about it. And now we have a variable that holds the value Matt, or that has the value Matt. Now, we can print that variable out just by typing the print command and typing parentheses, and then just typing the name of the variable that we want to print out. If I save that and then come over here to my PowerShell and just type the command py for Python, we're aiming the PowerShell at the Python interpreter. We're going to do py, and then I'm just going to type ap and hit tab, and it will find the file that we're trying to run. So if I hit enter, you'll see that it prints out the contents of what we assigned to this variable. Now, if later on in our program we're done using the value Matt and we want to change that to something else, we can just type the name of the variable again and then an equal sign, and then put a different piece of information in there. Let's say we want to change the name to George, and we have to put it inside of quotes because it's text. This is how you assign text to a variable. You just put it in quotes and then you make it equal to the variable name. And then let's say we want to print out what's in there now. If we save that, we should see the name Matt printed out, and then right below it we'll see this other information printed out after it. So if we run the same command, we see Matt, and then it gets printed out, and then when we're done with it we just put something else in that same variable and then print it out again. So again, it's just a good idea to think about variables as containers that you can put things in. That's not really a clear explanation of what's happening, but that's a good way to think about it when you're first getting started. Now, what kind of names can you use for variables? You might be thinking, well, what do I use for these labels that we're using? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do with the naming conventions as far as variables go. When you name a variable, you can use only letters, either lowercase and uppercase or a combination of both, numbers 0 through 9, and underscores. So that's the only characters you can use in a variable name. A letter or a combination of letters, numbers, and underscores. You can't have other special characters or other types of characters used for variable names. And they have to follow a certain convention, meaning your variable names have to have these parts that we talked about. They have to be in a certain location in the variable name. And you want to keep in mind that variables are case sensitive. So let me demonstrate what I just explained. Variables can have, like we just demonstrated a minute ago. I should have just left it there, but let's put the name Matt inside of a name variable, and then let's create a couple of other ones here. Let's do another name, and we're going to call this, we'll use the name Sue, and let's see, let's do yet another variable name, and we're going to call that one that, and let's see what else. Let's do this. And then we'll do this. All right, so all of these are valid variable names. All of these are okay. In fact, we could print all of these out, or print each of these out. I'm just going to create 5 of these print statements here, and I'm going to print out each one of these to show you just what the reason is for having all these different ones listed here. All right, and maybe this should be should have put this one up here. Okay, so each of these variable names is unique. You'll see that we've used this is where we mentioned a minute ago that they're case sensitive. You can use the same letters, but if they're not exactly identical, you can put 2 different values in them. Also, you can start a variable name with an underscore, and underscores can be inside of the variable name, like is right here, or you can just leave them out altogether and then separate your words with capital letters. This is known as camel casing, and sometimes people use it in as their naming convention. If you're just doing programming for yourself and you're not working on a team, you can pretty much name them whatever you feel like naming them. However, if you're working with other developers, there will be an established naming convention that you need to follow, and that's just for communication purposes, so that other people, when they look at your variable names, they understand what they're looking at. But if you're just programming for you and nobody else is going to see it, you can create your variable names however you want, and they'll print out. Now, just to demonstrate that these are all valid, I'm going to run this so that we can print each of them out here in succession. So I'm going to run this again, and I didn't save the file. You can tell in Notepad, if you're using Notepad, anytime you see this dot up here instead of an X, it means that there's a change that hasn't been saved. So if I hold down Control and hit S, you see it changed to an X. So now I can run it and we'll see the updated output. So you'll see that I printed these in the exact same order that they were assigned, and we get the exact same values over here. We get Matt, Sue, Edward, Hoskins, and Jones. All of these are each of these variables. So that's how you can, those are some of the allowed ways that you can name variables. The only other one that I didn't demonstrate, and I'll just demonstrate it here pretty quick, is let's say I wanted to put numbers in here. I'm just going to add 2 numbers to this variable name, and then I'm going to print that same variable out down here. Save it, and if I run it again, you're going to see the exact same list of information. And what this proves is that even though I added numbers to this first variable, it still printed out. We didn't get an error here, which means that's a valid variable name. So you can name your variables with alphanumerics and then an underscore. You just can't have the number at the beginning. And we're going to demonstrate those, the other kinds of configurations of these characters that don't work. So we're going to look at some illegal character or illegal variable names now. So let's say I wanted to do, a variable like that and make the first name Mike. Okay, and then what about this variable? That's illegal. You can't put a dash in there, and you can't do a variable like this either, because you can't have a space inside of a variable. So that variable is illegal. Let's see, what are some other illegal variables? Oh, here's one. See, this variable is, that variable is illegal because it's got a special character. That's not an alphanumeric or an underscore. So letters, numbers, and underscores are the only thing that you can use. And even with numbers, you can't put them at the beginning of the variable name. You can have a number in there, it just can't be the first character. And just to again prove that is true, I'm going to print each of these out, or try to print each of these out, and you'll see that it's going to fail as soon as we try to do this. We're going to get some errors. So I'm going to save that by hitting Control S, and then I'm going to clear this just so that it's obvious what happened. Okay, so it hit the very first character. It said, oh, that's a variable. It starts with a number. We can't do that. So it breaks there, so we're going to get rid of that to fix it. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to try to run the next one. And it says, you cannot assign to expression here. Maybe you meant equals equals instead of, and the reason why it's saying that is because it thinks we're trying to do a one variable minus another variable. So it thinks we're trying to perform an operation and assign something to an operation, but you can't do that. So we'll have to remove that one. so that one doesn't work. Let's try this other one. I'm not sure what we're going to get with this one. If we run it again, okay, so we've got another error, and it's pointing at what the problem is. It's saying this is invalid syntax, and really the only invalid syntax is the my and the space in front of name, because if you remove that, that's basically what we proved works in the last one. So let's remove that assignment, and then we will save this one, and we'll print it, and it says you can't assign to expression here. And again, we're getting the same thing as before. It's because we have an @ symbol in the variable name. So those are all illegal variable names. Now, what kind of things can you do with variables? Well, you can do some pretty interesting stuff with variables, just like you do in math class. Let's say we want to assign the variable x the value of 12, and we want to assign the value of y assign the variable y the value of 5. Well, then you can treat those variables as if they are numbers. So you can perform operations on variables or with variables. So let's do z, and we're going to make z equal to whatever x is plus whatever y is. And now if we print out z, look at what happens. You get one value, and that is z. Z represents whatever x is plus whatever y is. So we printed out the value of this operation performed on those two variables. One plus the other equals z. So you can treat those as if they are numbers in your program. Now, that's for like numeric values. But what about text? Well, let's I'm going to assign the variable fn. I'm going to assign it the name Matthew, and I'm going to do ln. I'm going to assign it the text way, and then we're going to make z equal to fn plus ln. And what do you think is going to happen here? Now you might be thinking, well, you're going to get Matthew Way, the name Matthew Way. You're going to be close, but it's not going to be formatted maybe the way you're thinking. So if we print this out, now what happened here? Well, because this is text, it adds one piece of text directly onto the end of the other. And it doesn't allow for, it doesn't realize that this is just two words. It's just sticking them together and then giving you the z. So what you want to do here is you want to do what's called in programming concatenating. You want to concatenate one piece of information to the end of the other, but you've got to concatenate that space as well. So how do you do that? Well, you just string your pluses together and you put a space inside of quotes right between them, and you assign all of this to that variable and then print that out. So if we print this out, you'll see now that the space is in there. So that's one way that you can include spaces in your variables if you're adding text together. Another way that you can do that, and this may not be the best place to demonstrate this, but I'm going to do it anyway because they're so handy. They're called F strings, and what that stands for is a formatted string. You just type the letter F, and then you put your quotes behind it, and then you put the variable names inside of curly brackets. So right here, I would put the fn variable inside of this set of curly braces, and I will put the ln variable inside of that, and then I'll just type the space in there. So basically, you're just typing out how you would want it to read and wrapping the whole thing in quotes, and then putting this little indicator here at the beginning to tell Python, hey, this is a formatted string, and any variables that you include in there, you just put it in between these brackets. If we print this out, we're going to get the exact same thing that we got before, which is just the first and last name separated by a space. To me, this reads a little bit better, and you don't have all those pluses in there. It may seem like it's not that much shorter, but looking at it conceptually, for me anyway, it's easier to see what's going on. So F strings might be the way to go if you prefer this way. However, you can, as we mentioned earlier, you can do fn plus ln with that space in between them. Either one of these works. You can see that this one is just, actually it's not really any shorter at all. It just seems like it's easier to read for me. So that's a couple of different ways that you can print out concatenated strings, or formatted strings, you might say. Now, I've kind of touched on it already, but you can print the contents of variables out just with the print statement, the print command, the print function. And like I said up here, you can print them out by either putting them in a variable and printing out the variable. You can concatenate them together. What would happen though if we wanted to put an age on here, and we just did a variable I'll think back to a time when I was a lot younger than I am now, and I'll just put that in as an age. So let's say that we want to print out the age along with the name. How do we put the age on here? Well, you might be tempted to just add the number to the end here, and that seems reasonable to do. But look what's going to happen when we do that. If we save that and we run it, we get a problem. We have a problem on line 6 of the program. When you get an error like this, it'll tell you what file the problem is in, it'll tell you what line the problem is on, and it will tell you exactly what it's seeing that it finds a problem with. And you see this expression here that has this plus with this arrow pointing up to it? It's basically saying, hey, that is the problem. Now, why is that a problem? Well, you can only concatenate strings to strings. You can't concatenate an integer to a string. So because we're trying to take what's an integer here, and that's a topic for another video, but just to explain it very briefly, each kind of information has different data types. And right now we're using text and numbers together. The text is known as a string. It's a string of characters. And the number is an integer because there's no decimal in it. So we're trying to concatenate or stick a number onto the end of what we've concatenated together as a string. And you can't do that in Python. Now, there's an easy way around it. All you have to do is come over here and use another function, kind of like we're using the print function here. You can run another function on this called str. And str is just short for string. What that's going to do is it's going to convert this age, which is a number, it's going to convert it into text. And then this is going to work. So let me just run it again. You got to save it. Control S and then run it again. And you'll see it did exactly what it would do if it was a piece of text. It even just stuck it right on the end like it did before. So we need to add the space that we're concatenating and print that back out. And now you'll see we have what we expected to get. Now, why did this print out but not this? Well, it's because before we ran the print command, we changed what was in the variable. And maybe you noticed it up here the first time we ran it, but it didn't fail until it got down here to this plus, which means that it didn't find a problem with this F string up here. Now, just to prove that, I'm going to comment out this line just by adding a pound sign in the front. Now, what that does is, let me explain that for people who are new to programming. This is a comment, and what it does is it tells the interpreter, hey, don't even consider this. Just pretend it's not even there. And so the interpreter skips over this line. It doesn't do anything with it. This is a good way to put code in there that you want to try and change it around, kind of like I'm doing here. So we're sticking this F string inside of this variable, and we're going to try to print it out. Notice what happens with this when we run it. We'll see if we get an error here. Isn't that interesting? If you concatenate this way, you have to use the string function to convert that number to a string. However, if you use F strings, you can just drop that numeric variable in there, that integer. You can put it in there, and the F string formats it as if it was text and does all that for you. So this is another advantage, in my opinion, to using F strings. It's easier. It saves you some code. You remember earlier that they were the same length when we were just doing first and last name, but look, now that we've added another variable, a third variable, look how much shorter this F string is than this other one. So that's just a little bit about printing out some values that are in variables. Let's move on to doing some tests on variables. How do we test what's in a variable? Well, that's pretty simple. We have a person with first name and last name here and an age. And so now, how would we, let's imagine that we wanted to determine whether or not this person was an adult. Well, you can run tests on variables. And we're just going to do an easy one here. We're going to go if age is greater than or equal to 18, then we want to print one statement. Okay, now in all other cases, though, we want to print a different value. So Alright, so let me just kind of explain what we're looking at here. This is an if-else statement, which we'll talk about later on, but just for the sake of what we're keying in on here is this. This is basically a comparison operator that allows us to compare two things. One of them is the integer 18, and the other one is whatever's inside of age. So what we're saying here is if whatever's inside of the variable age, which up here is 18, if that is greater than or equal to the integer 18, then, and then you put a colon there and drop down to the next line, and then you indent it, and then you tell it, if this is true, then print this out. In all other cases, if that's not true, then print this out. So that's what we're testing for here. I'm going to comment out this other. In fact, I'm just going to remove them because we're not going to use those anymore. But we'll and just to make it even simpler, that's the age, and we're testing age to see if it's greater than or equal to 18. If it is, we'll print this out. If it's not, we'll print that out. So Control S to save it, come over here, run the program, and it knows the age is 18. Let's say it's 17 though. What happens now when we run this? It prints out the other one, because when it compares this variable, when it compares what's in this variable to this value, it's not greater than or equal to 18, so it does the else part. So that's something that you can do with variables. What else can we do? Well, you can store, in addition to numbers and text, you can store other things inside of variables. And we won't go into a lot of detail on this, but I'm just going to give you an example here. Let's say we wanted to have a variety of ages in here. Alright, so now what we have, and I'll just separate these with spaces. So now what we have is a variable called ages, and what we're doing here is we're assigning a list of integers to that variable that we're calling ages. So you can put this whole batch of numbers into one variable. Now you may be thinking, well, how in the world do I get, how would I use that? And we'll talk about that in a different video. This is what's known as a list, and my plan is to do a video on lists where we kind of work with some of the data that's in there. So I'm not going to get into that right now, but just note that this is okay to do. You can put a list of numbers inside of a variable. I'm going to print it out here just to show you that that's true, and I better use the plural there, but I'm going to save that and I'm going to print it, and you'll notice that it printed out exactly what I have here. So that tells me that there's no error with that code. Python understands this. So you can put a whole list inside of a variable. In fact, you can put objects inside of variables. You can put other types of data inside of variables. And you can even reference different elements in this variable. So let's say I wanted to print out this number. I would just type this onto the end, I would tell Python, hey, look at the third element in that list and print that out and watch what you get. You get the 36. Now, you may have caught that. I said the third element, but I wrote a 2. Well, most programming languages start with a 0 index. So this would be item 0, this would be 1, this would be 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's 6 items in this list, but the last one is at index position 5. So I think that's, without getting too complicated about variables, that's some practical ways that you can use them, how you name them, what you can name them, what you can't name them, and then how you print some of them out depending on what's inside. We'll get into some of this stuff more in depth later on, but I just want you to understand with this video what a variable is and what are some basic things to know when you're working with variables. I hope that helps, and thanks for watching.